Hi everyone, good evening. My name's Alice Grundy. I'm Managing Editor of Australia Institute Press, and it's my absolute pleasure to be hosting this panel this evening. We're going to be talking about the latest essay from Vantage Point, which is called, if I can balance my various things, Aiming Higher by Professor George Williams. Vantage Point is the Australia Institute's new essay series, and this is the third that we've done. And we're already helping to shape the national conversation. The first issue was called After America, and it turned out to be a topic that people were very interested in talking about, how Australia's relationship with the United States, in particular with AUKUS, is shaping not only our budgets, but also our discussions of security. And then our second was Dead Centre by Richard Dennis, who's Executive Director of the Australia Institute. I'm so thrilled that we have three excellent guests tonight, but before I get into that, I would like to acknowledge that I've travelled here today from Ngunnawal and Ngambri lands. I'm on the lands of the Baramatagal people of the Darug Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty was never ceded. So allow me to introduce our panellists. First, to my immediate left is, as I think many in this room would know, Professor George Williams. He's the Vice-Chancellor and President of Western Sydney University. He's previously been Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Dean of Law and Anthony Mason Professor at the University of New South Wales. You may remember his book that he co-authored with Professor Megan Davis, Everything You Need to Know About the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And he's the author and editor of dozens more books. He has also appeared as a barrister in the High Court and led major public inquiries. Welcome, George.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Dastyari, who's a leading scholar in human rights law dedicated to challenging systemic inequality and transforming the conditions that silence and marginalise communities. Her work focuses on dismantling structural barriers and amplifying community-led solutions through rigorous research, deep collaboration and strong public engagement. And I've managed to leave off your role here at Western Sydney University. Could you fill that in for me?
Yes, I'm the Director of the Centre for Western Sydney here at Western Sydney University.
Thank you. Welcome, Az. And last but by no means least, we have the Honourable Dr Andrew Charlton MP, who is the Federal Member for Parramatta. I walked past a very impressive sign for his office on my way here. As an economist, business owner and former economic advisor to a Prime Minister, Andrew has the energy and experience to deliver a strong plan for Parramatta, according to his website. So thank you so much for coming, Andrew. So let's start with George, and let's start with the starting point for this essay. When the manuscript first arrived in my inbox, I was really thrilled to see that this is what you were leading with. What you were talking about is student poverty. So can you talk about the impetus to write the essay and what relationship you see between increases in student poverty and the higher education sector more broadly?
Yeah, thanks, Alice, and thanks everyone for coming, and thank you to my panellists. It's really good to be here tonight to be talking about these issues. And I wrote this book for a couple of reasons. One is because I've been really moved about what our students have told me about their experience of studying in higher education today, and I'll talk a bit more about that. But the other reason I wrote it is I wanted to understand how have we got to this point. As a country, as a rich country with enormous resources, enormous wealth, how have we got to the point where it is so common for Australian students to be in poverty while they study, where they're not sure where their next meal is coming from? Or if you look at Az's work, for example, they're writing their essays on a mobile phone, a 3,000-word essay on a mobile phone. And this is the very common experience, not just here of Western Sydney, but the data is the same from, say, Tasmania. In fact, around the country, if you don't have rich parents supporting you through university, there's a good chance you're either working extraordinary hours and running yourself to the bone, or you're living in poverty. It's just really difficult to get by in a city like Sydney in particular, where youth allowance is $47 a day, but the median rent's $110 a day. It just doesn't add up. I mean, I was aware of these issues when I arrived at Western, but it really didn't become real to me until I spent a lot more time with our students. That includes things like time at our food pantry, handing out food to our students, the free meals, about 23,000 a year we'll be doing this year, giving out the rice, oats and pasta, and just talking to the students and say, why are you here? why do you need this food? And they just say, I can't get by. This is the difference for me between going hungry today or whether I have breakfasts. And this is just the lived experience of so many of our students. And it just struck me as fundamentally wrong and as something that's really against that egalitarian ideal of a fair go. And if we stand for anything as a country, it's surely that everyone, irrespective of their background, deserves the chance through hard work to have an opportunity to great education and a great life. So for me, experiencing that firsthand, I really felt compelled to write about it. I felt it was missing from the public debate. There's a lot of debate about unis, but I felt that student perspective should be front and centre. That's what we're here for first and foremost as universities. And so I wrote it, if you like, not just to open my own eyes and learn more, but really to communicate to people about students not getting a fair deal, and we need to step up and do more for them.
And Andrew, as the member for Parramatta, I was hoping you could talk a bit about the position of Western Sydney University in the region. You know, what role you see the university playing for people here, both in terms of students, but, you know, the intellectual life, the cultural life, the training.
And thanks to Western Sydney University for hosting this event. Thanks to the Australia Institute for publishing this book, and thanks to you, George, for writing it. I think it's a really terrific book, a serious piece of work, very well argued, and we're very lucky to have George as the Vice-Chancellor of this university. Not only is he a first-class academic, but he's an extraordinary leader of the university and now taking a leadership role in shaping not just this university, but the sector. To answer the question, Western Sydney University is the engine of mobility in this region. In a metaphor that George uses a number of times in the essay, it is the ladder of opportunity that hundreds of thousands of students in this area have climbed up to have a better life and a strong career. And that is a huge part of Parramatta's success as well. You know, universities right around the world are a big part of the urban renewal and social progress of lots of post-industrial cities, Pittsburgh, Manchester, many others. And Parramatta is lucky enough to have 9 university campuses, of which Western Sydney University is by far the most significant. And together they have made an extraordinary difference to this city. But as George points out in his essay, it's not a university without challenges, and those challenges spill out into our city. He opens the book by talking about people at O Week. When I was at O Week, we queued for clubs and societies. At the beginning of this book, he talks about people queuing at O Week for food. And in my office, I have a student at Western Sydney University, and she's a terrific person. She does excellent work for me. I don't know how she's doing at her university. But it stuns me every single day when I walk in, Monday to Thursday, and see her in my office, working 4 days a week. She's studying law, and she's working for me 4 days a week. Now, that was not a thing when I was a student. When I was a student in Sydney, that was not a thing. I did postgraduate at Oxford University, and students at Oxford University were prohibited from having a job during the term. They were not allowed to have a job. It was seen as being too big a distraction from their study. They could have a job in the holidays, but not the term. What a world away from that student experience is the experience of most of the students in this city who are working very long hours. That is affecting their study. How can it not affect their study? And yet still find themselves in poverty. So I find this essay a real call to arms on many points. The university has been extremely important in the growth of Parramatta, the success of Parramatta. But in order for it to keep doing that, we also need to support it.
As I'll come to you in just a moment, but while we're on the topic of postgraduates, George, in the essay you talk about postgraduate poverty as well. And I just wondered if you wanted to expand a little bit on what it's like. Our expectations of postgraduates, the kind of research they're producing. The idea is at the end of a PhD, you become the expert in your field. How well can students do that if they're trying to balance so many working commitments and postgraduate study?
And look, it's really hard for postgrads as well. These are students doing PhDs. These are the best and brightest who we desperately need as a country to do this really advanced work. And the figures are really quite dramatic in showing what's happening with that group. They're suffering exactly the same issues of poverty, food and the like. I spoke, for example, to one of our students, Catherine Warwick, who's doing great research on platypus and the disappearing platypus and water quality, PFAS, a lot of things we're seeing in the media. And she said, as I say in the essay, she goes to the supermarket and counts the Weet-Bix she can afford each week, and actually literally wonders how long she can leave the lights on because she's worried about the electricity bill. And that's how much on the breadline she is as a really talented PhD student. And not surprisingly, if you look at the figures in Australia, the number of Australians doing PhDs over the last period's dropped 8%. Over that same period of about 5 years, the population's increased 10%. So in fact, the number of students doing those really hard degrees is plummeting from Australian students. And a really major reason is just cost of living. So again, I mean, what are we doing as a country in terms of we need this for the skills, the ingenuity, the industries, but actually we're pricing particularly people from backgrounds with not a lot of wealth out of doing the postgraduate degrees. And Catherine, she's getting through, but at a great cost. And I have to say she eats a lot of Weet-Bix, because that's all she can afford. That's literally what she eats.
So as just dialing back for a second and to that question about Western Sydney cultural, intellectual, economic life, how do you see the university fitting into that and promoting that in the region?
Yeah, thanks, Alice. Well, Western Sydney University is shaped by our region and we're accountable to it. We have a legislated mandate to serve our region, and I think that makes us very different to any other university. Our multi-campus model is built for and with the people of Western Sydney, but it's not just that we have a lot of campuses in Western Sydney, it's who we are. We have Western Sydney in our name, and because of our commitment to ensuring that the potential of this region is met, that its diversity, that its growth is actually translated into great opportunities for people of this region. We're known for our commitment to equity, for our commitment to diversity, for our impact. I mean, there's a reason why we've been named the best university for impact in the world, 4 years in a row. And the region that we serve is really remarkable. We're in a region where 3/4 of people have one or two parents born overseas. We speak 100 languages from 170 countries here. And that diversity is also reflected in our student body. George, in his essay, talks about how at least a third of our students are the first in their families to go to university. But, two-thirds of our students are the first to go to university. And we also have a situation where half our students speak a language other than English at home as well. That diversity is really our strength. We know that when you graduate with a bachelor degree, you are likely to earn at least a third more over your lifetime than if you don't have a university degree. So a university education isn't always a given for the students that we serve. The fact that we are able to open those opportunities really changes lives. But we also have to remember that there are these challenges. Andrew talked a little bit about those challenges, as did Andrew. When you're first in your family to go to a university or you're from a country other than Australia, the higher education sector has a lot of unwritten rules. We forget about them because we're so immersed in them. But if you don't have someone, you don't have the informal networks to translate those rules for you, higher education can be incredibly alienating and overwhelming. I can talk about my own experience at university. My parents came here fleeing persecution in Iran. And my first couple of years of university at different universities, this one, were incredibly alienating and overwhelming until I met Mary Crock, who happens to just be here, a wonderful lecturer, and Ron McCallum, who held my hand and helped me navigate that very foreign world. So as a university serving our region, we have to make those invisible rules visible for our students. We have to ensure that we're opening doors for everyone and that's inclusive. But as George points out in his essay, we're doing that in a higher education setting where it was never designed for universities like ours. Our university is serving students that might need additional support, and they might need a little bit more in the way of place-based initiatives. And that is not what our funding model supports. So I think the role that we play, as Andrew pointed out, is a really important one in opening doors, in becoming a way for people to have opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't. We're really committed to ensuring everyone can have access to education, starting here in Western Sydney.
Thank you. And when we're talking about everyone having access to education, George, one of the things that you talk about in your essay is the Job Ready Graduates legislation, which has put us in a situation where you can pay $50,000 for an arts degree. Can you take us through some of the policy settings that have brought us to the current situation that we're in now and some of the difficulties that they cause?
And of course, it's been quite a trajectory, and we're not celebrating but recognising the dismissal of the Whitlam government 50 years ago, a couple of days ago. And of course, that was the government that brought about no-fee university education. So it was free for students at that point. But I would say even then it was deeply imperfect. It was free, but not many people could access it. What we saw when the Hawke government came in is they wanted to fix that. They wanted to massify higher education, move it beyond the free but limited education to actually open it up to large numbers of Australians. But they had a problem in the Hawke government, and that is they couldn't afford it. How can you open up literally hundreds of thousands of places? So what they did in the 1980s was they fused the economic rationalism of the time, think the privatisation of Qantas, Telstra, Commonwealth Bank, with actually some really radical policies that were designed to achieve fairness. And they designed a university system that said, essentially, we're going to charge students, we're going to introduce fees. That was originally HECS. I came in as a student paying HECS, $1,800 a year. I remember, like other people, thinking, how unfair was that, $1,800 a year? Well, it's gone a bit beyond that. But essentially what the government did is it opened up the sector, had mergers. This was when Western Sydney University was created in 1989, the bringing together of prior institutions. And the government said, well, we're going to open it up, but we're not going to pay for it. And at that point, government funding provided about 80% of university revenue. So today it's 40%, but the number of students has tripled. So it's been wildly successful as a government policy. They've opened up higher education, tripled it, and halved the percentage they pay. But that comes at a cost, and two costs. One is that it really focuses on universities as corporate entities. You've got to raise money. So as a Vice-Chancellor, it's always about how do you make the bills add up. The government funding is never enough. So around the country, you see universities really focused on making money. So international students have become critically important because they cross-subsidise domestic students, because they pay literally triple, 4 times, sometimes what a domestic student might pay. So it's not surprising to see one uni, 51% of all students are international. That's a bit high, we're only 19%, but that's one implication, bring in the international students. But the other way is just charge the domestic students more. And that's what the government's consistently done to defray its own cost. And so we went from $1,800 originally, well now it's $51,000 for an arts degree. And the arts degree is the most expensive degree that was introduced in 2021 by the Morrison government with the Jobs Ready Graduate Package. And that was a critical package because it severed any link between earnings and the fees. That had been the principle. John Howard brought it in. You do business or law, you pay more because you're going to earn more. But they deliberately put arts degrees at the top, not because of earnings, but to stop people wanting to do arts degrees, a deliberate price signal. They said, we don't value the arts degree. We want to dissuade the students from doing it. And so that's why it's in that $51,000 category, even though it is the degree of choice of women, low SES students, Indigenous. It's the pathway degree for mobility. because many people from our uni wouldn't think straight to law or business, they think arts. And often they change, they shift into other degrees. But that $51,000 degree is at such a level that many people never pay it off in their lifetimes. They've got permanent debt that affects housing loans and the like. And also what happens with these students, and I've spoken to a number of them, is they don't swap to something else. It's meant to be a price signal. Don't do $51,000 for arts. A maths degree is $14,000. That's a big difference. But guess what? A philosophy student doesn't swap to maths. Just doesn't work. What they instead do is they don't go to uni. So we've seen a big drop in low SES students, about 15% over the last 7 years. The poorest students are going to uni in fewer numbers because the pathway is being closed off. They don't want the debt. And Andrew's government's spoken very clearly about wanting to change it. And from our point of view, we're just pushing and saying, please change it. This is unfair and wrong. And I'd also say exactly wrong when we should be prioritising the arts. Now's the time with AI, we need more human skills, more humanities. Should be a degree of choice. It's wrong-headed as a nation to actually say, yeah, move away from that degree, it's not valued. That's the signal we're sending, and I just think we shouldn't be doing it. So looking forward to when the government grasps, it's a big budget issue, I recognise that, but for us, this is the biggest thing we're asking for. It's not more funding for uni, it's actually better fee structures for students. That's our number one ask.
So Andrew, I'm not going to ask you for a timeline. Instead,
Go on, why not?
Instead, I'm going to ask, what are you hearing from your constituents about their attitudes to universities and how they're changing? I mean, Parramatta, it's 5 years since I lived in Sydney, and this is such a wildly different place from the Parramatta that I knew. What kinds of changes are they seeing and talking to you about?
I mean, I think in this city, in Parramatta, people are incredibly proud of this university and the role that it plays in the city and the success that it has had. George talks in the book, however, about a broader loss of social licence in the university sector. He describes the rates of dissatisfaction among students at, I think he said 25% of students are expressing dissatisfaction. He talks a bit about the rates of students dropping out from university, students not going to university. At a time when we want more and more students to be skilled, we desperately need students to have the critical thinking skills to navigate the modern world and the skills to be able to do that. I think we need to reflect very hard on those things. I think we are very lucky in Australia that we have an incredible profession of university academics who are extremely dedicated, who are extremely skilled, who provide great education to our students, but do so in increasingly difficult circumstances. Our government laid out a 10-year reform agenda in the Universities Accord that Jason Clare, the Education Minister, led. And some elements of that accord have already been put in place. And I think the response that we got from the public show that the public agrees that something needs to happen. We did a very significant cut to HECS debts. And I think most Australians thought, yeah, those debts are too high. We will support this very significant government measure to reduce HECS debts. We have been introducing paid prac so that students don't have to also do the practical components of their course without pay, an additional financial burden on them. And we've laid out a long-term agenda for reform. So I think there is a lot to do in this sector, of course. I think we still have a university system which is very highly regarded, but as George said, that goodwill is not inexhaustible.
As thinking about your centre, you've started talking a bit about it, but if you could talk a little bit more about what region-specific research and engagement means and what kinds of benefits that has.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. I think it goes a lot to what Andrew was saying about social licence. anyone that knows our university knows we talk a lot about our place in Western Sydney. We're so proud of our commitment to equity, to the transformative power of education. And George talks a lot in his essay about needing to connect to community, to listen to community, and to advocate for the needs of community as a university. And I'm really lucky to lead a centre that has the job of doing that. So at the Centre for Western Sydney, we use research and engagement to work out what the needs of the people of Western Sydney are. And then we get the opportunity to partner and to go out there and advocate for those needs, because we've realised that our students are not just studying and graduating in a vacuum. We work on 5 key areas. We work on education equity, of course, but also community empowerment, economic development, environmental sustainability, and the creative industries, because we've recognised that the things that affect the ability of a student to study, to stay in education, to have jobs when they leave, all relate to things like transport. Can they actually get to our universities, and can they get to their jobs, their housing, their digital inclusion, their childcare, the heat in Western Sydney, the flooding, the fires, and their economic stability. So we find it really important to not only talk about what's happening in the classroom, but all of the other factors that influence what's happening in the classroom and beyond. To give you an example, we, for example, know that Western Sydney already has 1/10 of Australia's population. And 1/3 of the people of this state already live in Western Sydney. And that's growing. The 2.7 million people that were recorded in 2021 are expected to become 3.4 million by 2041. So if funding was equitable in Western Sydney, we would see 1/10 of federal funding and 1/3 of state funding in this region. And then we would also see so much more funding to make up for the years of underinvestment. But of course, we don't have that. And as a centre, we are putting forward a model that shows how that kind of funding could be achieved over time. We see our obligation as serving our region, because when we're truly connected to our communities and are listening to communities, then our university becomes a source for transformation.
It's been good to see the Create New South Wales plan for literature come out recently, which is really focused on Western Sydney. Let's hope that there's some money behind that in the near future.
And I plug our centre and say that a couple of reports we wrote about the creative industry, it's really influenced and were cited as the reasons for why Western Sydney has attracted a lot of funding in this space as well.
Excellent.
So plug for us.
Happy to hear it. I'm going to ask one more question before we switch to questions from the audience. So this is your opportunity to ready your question in your mind, and just a reminder, questions, not comments. So the question of AI, you've already mentioned it, George, it's front and centre in a lot of people's minds right now. Given the massive shift in technologies that we've seen, what effect is this having right now, and what do you see the effects being in the near future?
Yeah, it's a big question, but it's something we're absolutely grappling with at the moment. I see AI is a fundamental challenge to how we deliver education. Great opportunities for us to personalise education as well. And we've got 50,000 students potentially personalising down to the individual student with some of the technologies we can bring in. So big opportunities. But as educators, we've got to ask some pretty basic questions about what does it mean to deliver education in a world where information is now ubiquitous. In my case, we can get quite readily constitutional law advice from ChatGPT. It could put me out of business, unfortunately. And as I say in the essay, one of the things I did was ask ChatGPT, replicating my work as an academic, draft me an essay question for a second-year public law class, did a great job. Give me an answer at 3,000 words, did a great job. Give me a marking rubric and mark your answer, gave itself a high distinction. And I couldn't fault any part of that process. That took me about 3 or 4 minutes to replicate from beginning to end the academic work of setting, answering, and then marking. And, you know, one thing I know from talking to our students that really worries them is increasingly they're saying, I'm worried that I'm paying money, I'm going to university, but I'm not learning anything. because they're worried that they can replicate what they're doing and some of their assessments and the like. And less so here, but I know with my own son, for example, at another university, he said to me he thinks every single assessment he could have used ChatGPT. And his real worry is how does he hold back when his friends are using it, getting really high marks, and he feels he's being disadvantaged for not just letting the system replicate his full assessment. And that's the reality for many students at the moment. So how do we deal with that and cope with that? We're looking at a few things. I mean, one thing we'll hopefully announce soon is we're looking at an AI boot camp for all of our students beginning in February, first uni in the country to do it. Every student, starting with commencing students, but also moving on to other students, will spend a day or more essentially getting up their AI skills. What's the ethical and appropriate use of AI before they come to uni next year? And we're also rolling out a large app which will be AI powered, which is about the university in your hand. Knowing that our students often only have a mobile phone, well, how do we roll that out? How do we pre-populate timetables? How do we make study easy? So there's a revolution we're in the middle of at the moment, which we're grappling with. And our challenge is the technology is moving so quickly and universities typically move very slowly. Somehow we've got to bridge that gap. We've got great people working in this area. I think we're ahead of many unis, but across the world, it is this existential question. What does education mean when you've done it a particular way for a couple of centuries, stand up the front and talk to people, when in fact that really doesn't make as much sense in the world in which we live?
Andrew, as Assistant Minister for Science, Technology and the Digital Economy, I'm interested to hear your reflections on the relationship between higher education and technology, and particularly in relation to AI.
Well, George is right. This is a massive change in almost every aspect of the way that we learn and the way that we teach and the knowledge that we need. And universities will have to adapt to that, and it will be a very big change. You know, we have adapted to changes at least of this nature, if not of this scale before. Yesterday I was talking to someone who is he leads a large Australian accounting firm. And he was telling me that when he was a student, the take-home work for accountants was to go home with the phone book. Remember we used to have those big phone books? Go home, get your phone book and pull out a page and just add up all the phone numbers. Because a very big part of being an accountant was addition. And there were months in the year where accountants did almost nothing other than sit there and add for days, if not weeks on end. And then the spreadsheet came in, and that made that skill of being able to add up very quickly completely irrelevant. And by the time I did accounting, very briefly, very badly, they were not telling us to go home and add up phone books. It was a whole range of different skills. And accountants today, there are more accountants now than there were when they had to add them all up. And those accountants today are helping their clients with difficult problems. They are understanding the needs of their clients, working with them on various different types of financial challenges and financial products. That is one small change in one small discipline in response to a big technological shift. The problem now is that we are having a huge technological shift that requires a similarly huge adaptation. And that's an adaptation that requires very different skills that people will require in the era of AI. Very different delivery of the way those skills are acquired, and very different ways of learning. And we have to do that shift, that adaptation, at a time when, as George points out in the essay, we have created a system which does almost the opposite of that in a way that is not working for a lot of students. So that's a big challenge to confront. And as the joke goes, if you were trying to get to that point, you wouldn't start from here.
As I note that you co-authored a paper last year on inclusive and equitable education with a focus on digital inclusions. So what relationship do you see between the two, and how best can a university like Western support that?
Yeah, thanks. This year we, with Professor Corinne Sullivan, we did a big study of First Nations digital inclusion, and that builds on the work that you talked about, which was about digital equity and education equity. And the research across all of this is really clear. In 2025, we can't separate digital equity from digital equity from education equity anymore. The Australian Digital Inclusion Index, which is a study that measures how much people are online, how connected they are. They look at ability of people online, whether people have access to technology, whether they can afford it, how connected they are, the regions they're connected in, has shown us that 1 in 5 people in Australia is digitally excluded. So we've had this really fascinating conversation about AI, but we've got to remember that technology isn't available to everyone, and it definitely can't be used safely by everyone. The issue is most pronounced for First Nations peoples and people who come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And our research shows that it's a very, very big problem in Western Sydney. It's much more pronounced in Western Sydney than it is in the rest of Sydney. The digital equity issue has become so much worse over time. Digital equity was an issue before COVID. We knew that people needed access to computers and the internet and needed to use it safely. But everyone and everything went online during COVID. That was supported at the time with people getting a lot of dongles and a lot of computers were given out. However, the whole world transformed. The way we taught changed. So even when we came back, we used technology so much more, but we took all the support away. All those dongles were taken away. All of those computers were taken away from people. And the cost of living crisis and a world that is more online than ever is creating a massive gap for the students that don't have the technology and can't participate. And in a university setting, it means that a lot of our students are going to be academically affected. They can't participate in online activities. They can't do their readings online. They can't put in their assessments online. And the survey we did of First Nations university students was really eye-opening for us. As George mentioned, a third of our Indigenous students are using their phones to do their assessments. What's even more troubling is 42% of the university students we talk to are cutting down on medicine in order to stay connected. So what that means for us as a university is that we have to never assume that our students have access to the adequate technology. And we need to invest in digital literacy, including AI literacy that George is talking about, because if we don't, we're leaving behind a lot of people.
So now we have time for questions from the audience. I believe we have a roving mic. Yes, there's a question. If you can just hold on for one moment and we'll get the mic to you.
Thank you. My name's Chris Brogan. I live in East Hills on the Georges River, or Tugra, as my friend Glenn Timbury, Director Senator Pemulwuy, refers the Georges River to its real name. We used to have a university around the corner from me, but you've recently knocked it down. It was once public land, and it's covered in 30 hectares of Cumberland Plain woodland, which is protected under the EPBC Act, which you're about to clear. I've tried to get in touch with you about this, but you have not returned my calls. So I'd like a quick comment about why you're knocking down our university. And also I've got a financial analysis document.
Just one question.
I'll ask this one question about the deal you've done over what was the Rickard Road car park in Bankstown with Canterbury Bankstown Council and Walker Corp. I've got the report here. I'll just quote from it and you can respond. This deal will burden the university with up to $8 billion in obligations over 60 years, diverting resources from education to private profit. Walker Corp.
Okay.
Can you answer that question?
Yeah, very happy to answer that question. In fact, it's something we've dealt with a bit. There was a media report on that which was just wrong, and it's probably coming from that report, I suspect. With our Bankstown campus in particular, I mean, that's something that's been a great success. It's financially really prudent. We have absolutely defrayed risk by working with the private sector, because otherwise that would mean that the university take on debt that we can't afford. But it's been a really good investment for us. We've just had TAFE agree to move into that campus as well. They're paying us rent. And that's going to be a really amazing facility for Bankstown, with the university and TAFE in the same place. And having looked at that carefully when I came in, it's obviously done before I arrived, but having looked carefully when I came in, I'm really confident it's actually going to be a great community asset. And particularly in Bankstown, where you really need something like that as a magnet, with the hospital coming in, the great facilities coming in, I'm really confident that that's actually going to deliver for the community.
No, down. Excuse me. This isn't your event. Down the back.
Hi everyone, thank you so much. Seb from CSE at UNSW. Hi everyone. We're standing on the edge of the Asian century. You know, this century is Asia's, and I think everybody knows that. One of the biggest facilitators of intercultural communication and one of the biggest growers of soft power is the movement of people. And our universities here in Australia have been at the very forefront of the movement of people, both into and out of Australia and across the region. For all three of you, if you could have your shopping list, what will be at the top of the list for what you would like to see the Australian university sector as a whole do across Asia in this new Asian century? Thank you.
Sure. I mean, I agree with the premise of the question. I think that that Australia's connection with Asia through our university system is an extremely important source of soft power. You know, traveling through Southeast Asia, the number of people that you meet who studied in Australia, have friends or family who studied in Australia. I mean, that is the kind of soft power relationship that is so valuable and so difficult to create, and we are very lucky to have it. If I could, to answer your question, if I could do one thing to build on that, I think I'd like to see more of those students who come from Asia and study in Australia to have not just an educational experience, but also a professional experience while they're here. That might be internships, it might be periods of significant work during their study. I think a lot of them end up coming here and going home, maybe working in jobs that are unrelated to their profession. And so they go away with a lot of goodwill, but what they don't go away with is really strong commercial and business and professional connections that we can then build on to develop trading and investment relationships with the fastest growing region in the world. And despite the enormous connectivity that our university system has generated with generations of students, we still have remarkably little trade with Southeast Asia, remarkably little investment with that region. So for me, one thing the university system could do to contribute to that, I think, would be to combine professional experiences with those educational experiences.
I think I would like there to be equal opportunity for all students to participate in programs that would maybe take them to places like Southeast Asia and Asia more generally. At the moment, it's an impossible thought to think that someone who needs to work 4 days a week, for Andrew, for example, and still do a law degree, could afford to go and do 6 months in another country. So if there was funding to ensure that it's not just the most privileged students that get those opportunities, but everyone has those opportunities, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, for me, I'd actually like to see the Australian community recognise just how much international students are contributors along the way. You're saying, I actually feel really privileged that they choose to study with us. I recognise a lot of the international students are backed not just by families, but sometimes whole villages. They've made enormous sacrifices to come to Australia. And this perception of rich international students taking Australian housing is just so wrong. I haven't met one international student who's bought a $1.8 million house in Parramatta yet. And I tell you what, of using our food pantry in our campuses, international students use them just as much as domestic students, because very often they're here and they're in poverty as well. They suffer the same cost of living issues. So personally, I'd like to see a bit more gratitude that they choose to study with us. They support jobs in this country. They're contributors. They build the soft power and as well. And Andrew's been a wonderful champion of this, and I really thank him for that. But for example, when Peter Dutton called international students the new boat people, as he did, that's just absolutely the wrong turning. So unfair to demonise that group, because frankly, they support a lot of Australian jobs and a lot of jobs as well I'd recognise at my university.
Next question over here.
Hi, my name is Chandran. I'm a retired academic. My question is a bit general in nature. You did mention that it was $1,800 when you started your university education, and it has now gone to $50,000 for arts degree. I just want to ask you, is there anything the universities should have done or could have done, perhaps to make the community more aware of the value of an arts degree or the arts discipline itself, that would have made the community react differently when Morrison sent this so-called price signal, and which might have made Morrison think twice, assuming that Morrison does think twice. I'm not sure, that is the premise. But in any case, looking back in the hindsight, do you think universities could have done something to alleviate the problem, at least a little bit? Not just your university, all universities together. Thank you.
I think, and look, Morrison was probably Education Minister at the time, I suspect as well, given his other portfolios. But so perhaps he could have done something about this. But the answer is yes. And I haven't made friends in the uni sector, but I've basically said as a sector we rolled over. We did not fight for our students at that point. And I feel quite strongly that students, and I've spoken to students, there's residual and I think justifiable anger that they felt abandoned by the uni sector. And I think essentially as a sector, we felt we'd get the funding we wanted, but at the cost of students. And I think there's a lesson there. I think as a sector, you're defined by who you fight for. And we've got to fight for our students. And, and part of this essay is really trying to articulate that strongly, because I think that now is the time, even if we got it wrong, it's never too late. We need to make this case strongly. And it is just so unfair. And when you look at young people generally, I feel very strongly that when you add debt, unsustainable debt, housing pressures, climate change, there's such intergenerational inequity. And as a uni sector focused on education, not just young people, but all sorts of people, we've got a role here to point these things out and argue for fair fee settings. So yes, I think as a sector we do bear some of that responsibility. And I think it's part of those social licence issues. We've got to be out there fighting the good fight.
I think we've got time for 2 questions. So maybe if we have 2 questions, there's one just up the front here and then one down the back there. Sorry, down the back here. Oh, has someone got the mic already? Oh, off you go then.
Yeah, I'm at the University of Sydney. I just come from the whole phases of teaching undergraduates first year introductory political science, so intro to Australian politics. My greatest difficulty as someone who's just received that PhD is that I now have to spend what would be about 50 minutes to mark an essay that should take 16 minutes, or at least how I'm normally paid. The students do not read very well, and therefore they do not write very well. We are saddling a generation with debt who are not receiving the skills because they do not have the capacity to refine their skills. This worries me for several reasons, partially because my job is dependent upon these people, and I'm also having a moment in my life where I will perish if I do not publish, and I cannot publish because I'm explaining to someone that the word verbal does not mean written. This is the state that we're in. We have a literacy crisis in this country, and I really do think that we possibly need to consider the actions that universities should take in terms of their social license and onus for whom they admit and the consequences for their future in terms of debt, etc.
So where's the question?
What are the responsibilities for universities and policymakers for the admission of students?
Yeah, look, I can start. And I absolutely accept the premise of your question. And we see at Western a really troubling number of students who we admit with both literacy and numeracy problems. And that has probably got worse over recent years. There's a few factors for that I'll mention, but I think the answer is that we need to support those students as best we can. We've got a lot of dedicated programs and the like. And very often these are students who have gone to public high schools and frankly, I think feel let down by that system. They've often gone through year 12, they haven't had a teacher. Often the problems go back to primary school. There's deep problems. So as a university, we really focused actually upon primary and high school education as much as we are at university level, because that's where we've got to get it right. Because otherwise we see exactly what you're seeing. Through our School of Education, we're looking at setting up a brand new centre focused on teaching education. How do we really lift the support provided for teachers? What's the new model of teachers in the world in which we live? So I suppose in the end, I accept what you say, but the answer is not to deny these students admission to university. It's to fix the system. So they come to us with the skills and in the meantime, actually give them the skills when they get to us. Because otherwise, I mean, these literally are the very students who will benefit most from a university education and the social mobility. And so this is sort of the wicked problem we're facing. It's also true that the unis like ours, which have the biggest problems and have to invest the most in literacy, food and others, are often the universities in the greatest financial strain too. And that's, again, there's a two-track system in Australia, both who can afford uni and who can't. And the unis who are most focused on those students who typically can't afford it are the ones who are most financially challenged like ours. So there's a range of quite deep structural problems in the sector, but I absolutely get it. I've spoken to many of those students, and at Mind, I'm really committed, along with my team, a number of people here, really trying to answer that question so our students can get through uni successfully.
And in the essay, you talk about not that NAPLAN is the be-all and end-all, but you talk about changes in NAPLAN results over time and how this is a question where we have to be making change at a primary school level all the way through.
Yeah, even early learning, we're really focused on the first 5 years of life are really important for this as well. And very often you see that the data shows that what goes wrong is often in primary school. So again, it's all the way through the educational system. What the NAPLAN data shows is both ongoing problems, but if you look at the bottom 25% by socioeconomic group, in Australia, those students typically are 5 years behind the educational attainment of other Australian students. So you can imagine we might get someone, we have the largest number of low SES students in the country. They get to us at 18. Some may have the reading and writing ability of 13-year-olds. That's the average we're dealing with, but they're the ones we've got to get into uni. So there's structural deep problems with the education system. And I mean, another stat that really worries me, if you look at students even finishing high school, I'm talking about the ones that finish, the level of attainment of finishing year 12 across Australia in government schools has dropped 10% in the last 7 years. So it's gone down 10% finishing year 12. So that's another factor. You know, what's happening to those students, and particularly young men, actually, they're the ones who are even more affected than young women. The young women are really thriving. We've got a whole generation of young men not getting the same education, missing out on opportunities. Where we're going to be in 10 to 15 years, we have this large group of young men who are missing out on the best jobs. What are the social issues that are going to flow from that?
There's a question towards the front here. Yeah. Oh, no, sorry, the young woman. We need a woman.
Always, that's always the answer. So thank you all for your time. I'm Jacinta Sassine. I'm an associate lecturer based at the School of Law here at Western. So thank you for your time and everyone in sharing these insights. So I have a question. I think it follows really nicely from the previous couple of questions. For context, I teach data and privacy law, but I also teach legal theory. And so currently responsible for a first year core teaching legal analysis and critique. So, you know, seeing a lot of these challenges that you're talking about in the classroom. And so my question comes from that, dare I call it, a frontline experience of being in the classroom with students and hearing these stories. So obviously the research syncs up with a lot of the work that, you know, you guys are doing as well, but particularly from an educator in a classroom, we're seeing these issues of digital literacy. And I really like what you said, Az, about making the invisible rules visible, because there are a lot of students who come in, they don't know, especially, from that first year, they're confused, they're overwhelmed. We even go in with the assumption, I'll even call, teaching teams out saying, here's an assessment, do this. And then I have a student coming into my office with a laptop, literally held together by duct tape, and they're trying to do these things. And so it really is about carving out time, which isn't always easy for these students. So the question would be about connecting what is happening at this policy level, at the structural level of the university, to what we are seeing on the front line as educators in the classroom. Just practically, what can we be doing to try and close some of these gaps? What can we be doing when students come to us with these stories and they tell us, actually, I can't come to class because, I'm responsible for looking after 5 of my siblings and my parents aren't working right now. And so we hear these stories and we want to do more. And I think it isn't about just saying, hang in there, you can do it. But how can we actually try and meet some of those external factors from within the university at that level? And how can we partner with, the centre and other sort of systems within the university in creating that community change from within as well? So a broad question, but just to tie some of those threads together.
Oh, thanks, Jacinta. I think what you have raised is really, really important. I think today it's not just enough to bring a couple of students in and then send them home with assessments and not have that relationship. That's why it is a privilege to have a centre like ours, the Centre for Western Sydney, that is advocating for those bigger issues for the people of our region. And it's whether or not they have access to education, how that education is carried out, but also what happens to them when they leave as well, because I think that's part of our social licence as well. George mentioned that a lot of men are dropping out. Western Sydney has more women who are graduating with bachelor degrees than the national average, and yet the jobs and opportunities are not there. So I think it is also part of our role to ensure that our graduates are going into a future that they deserve. But it takes time and it takes money, and I think part of that is changing the funding model for universities so that the universities aren't encouraged to only take the students that have the least need for support. So that's university sector is encouraged to take on students that do need that additional support and then funded to provide that support. It's hard in today's climate.
Can I say in my case, what can I do? I can write an essay about, and literally it's one of the reasons I've written the essays, because this is what students have told me. And I just felt that I wanted to report faithfully on what I've heard about digital literacy, food, and that this was the missing part of really the debate about where higher education is. This, for me, in many ways, this for me is the real story. I mean, higher education is there to serve students, but it should be at the top level of the debate. It's often what we're missing. I mean, what we can do at a university level is, as you know, if you look at our new strategy, Western 2030, it starts with student success. That's up front. That is the first thing. We've got Marianne Diva here, great members of her team. Their job with me and others at the uni is to prioritise student success. This year we declared Western's Year of the Student. So Year of the Student at Western this year. Let you in on a secret, it's going to be the Year of Student next year too. Every year at Western Sydney Uni. So we have scarce resources, but it's about priorities. And as much as this has been a really tough year with the restructuring and the changes, and I acknowledge the impact upon people here, it's designed to deal with these problems, to direct our scarce resources to serve our students, deliver a great education, and really make sure our money is actually put for our staff and programs to deliver on what's most important. Even then, it won't be enough. And so separately, the essay's advocating, nationally for change in structures, funding, job-ready graduates. And I'm really keen that Western has a loud voice in that, because our stories are powerful and we've got a unique mission in what we do. We are the uni of social mobility and opportunity, and we need settings that enable us to achieve that.
There's a question towards the front here, and then and one behind, and they'll be our last two. Yes, just here.
Thank you. My question is, we live in an age where power, influence and control determines outcomes. What matters to us as human beings is ethics, morals, communication with others, and working together as a combined society. have a question for you, Andrew. I come from the Central Coast, which is part of Greater Sydney. You might not know, but the government made it part of Greater Sydney without telling us. That was the Liberal government. But now the Labor government is in charge, and before the Liberal government left, I've worked for over 25 years with the traditional custodians on the Central Coast. They're the descendants of Bungaree, who was one of the best drawn known persons in Macquarie's day. The University of Newcastle's Wallatuka unit and the Darkinjung Land Council, formed in 1984, on the Central Coast conspire to write and argue and control the recognition of the traditional custodians by saying that the Guringai never existed, because their name was formed by a man who tried to name them because they always said they were from this place. And he formed the name Kuringai. And we've got people writing publicly, but not only that, we have got governments controlling. And for this, I want to ask you, Andrew, why do you say that unless traditional custodians hold the 1984 gift of native title usage, you have to ask the local land council who they are? That's a policy that was put in place by the Liberal government just before they were losing office, but it now means that the descendants of Bungaree are outlawed on their own country.
Okay. Andrew, did you want to respond to that?
Well, I mean, firstly, thank you for your advocacy for First Nations people. First Nations people need allies and supporters, and you're clearly one of those. I'll have to take your specific question in relation to that group on notice, but I'll be very happy to do that. Thank you.
And just towards the back there, yes.
Right. Thank you. I admire the work you guys are doing and a passion. And my question is one of demography, relevance, and continued expansion. So I'll go like this. I've come from Asia Pacific, as you can clearly know. You all may think I'm Indian. No, I'm born Malaysian, but I've got definitely 10,000 years. I've done my ancestry. You can sit down and have a yarn. Anytime, Andrew, you guys, you can come over. I'll cook you a good dinner and we can have a yarn. But outside of that, if you look at the problems, and I'm seeking answers here, we are going behind. Parents have gone behind. Hence, students have to work harder and get that meal. Parents are also getting a meal. I've got a master's degree. I've been wanting to do a higher degree and aspire to become a change maker. You, Western City University, right? I think you're tied with Walker and what is this? Some group that does entrepreneurship. I forget the name. Sydney School of Entrepreneurship?
Look, we have lots of partners in that
Correct.
space.
So similarly, drop up and start up. So if I look at a university and with a master's degree, do you know what I'm doing now? My professor saw me the other day at uni. He caught me guarding in front of a retail space. I'm proud. I don't want to sit at home and collect job seeker. But that aside, many people always are doing. So what's the opportunity even for students to go in, study, drop up, start up, and then come back? So you continue to keep the relevance. Couple of youngsters who can...
We're really out of time, I'm sorry. So we can go with that question.
For us to come back, drop up and start up and redo. We are not going to sit down and burden the tax system, but rather continue our relevance to contribute. That's really what this is about. What are you doing in that?
Yeah, look, I agree. And I think, in fact, particularly in Western Sydney, mobility between different education streams is critical, whether it be at a particular time in life. We've got many, many mature age students, particularly women, actually come very frequently to university to upskill, change career. The other thing we're particularly focused on at the moment is TAFE articulation. We're big believers in go to TAFE and then come to uni, or go to uni and then go to TAFE. At the moment, it's far too difficult, and it's getting in the way of people getting ahead. And, in our case, we just think that free choice, easy study, and yes, you should be able to enter and exit the system at multiple points as suits you at the lowest cost in the quickest way in order to help you get ahead in life.
I'm sorry that we haven't been able to get to all the questions, but we have some catering this evening. So if you'd like to hang around and keep the conversation going, we'd love to keep talking with you. Thank you so much to Western Sydney University for hosting us this evening. For Vantage Point, I'm really thrilled that we have Professor Williams' essay as our third. It's provoking so many conversations in the sector and beyond. On your chairs tonight, you'll see that there's a bit more information about the Australia Institute. If you would like to sign up for more events like this or to learn a bit more about our work, you can just have a look at the QR code on the pamphlet. And we can't do it without our very, very many supporters. Thank you so much for our speakers, George Williams, the Honourable Dr Andrew Charlton and Professor Dastyari. Thank you so much all for coming tonight. Glebe Books is selling copies of Aiming Higher, and George has promised me that he will sit and sign as many copies as you buy. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.